as far as the British government is concerned, in the Middle East. Andrew Mitchell is here. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us on the programme. What is the latest on the British victims, first of all?
Well, as you know, 6 of them have sadly died and been murdered, and we are very concerned indeed about 10, and we are doing everything we can to negotiate their release.
The 10 that are still missing, do we still think that they're alive?
We pray that they are.
No confirmation at this stage?
We don't, I'm afraid, at the moment.
OK, talk to me about what's happening with the Rafah Crossing, which is the border between Egypt and Gaza. We had a live shot from there most of the morning yesterday. We were under the impression, we were told by the Egyptian government that that was going to open yesterday. What's happened, do we know?
Well, we've heard overnight that following, I think, 8 hours of discussion with the Israeli War Cabinet by the Foreign Minister from America, Antony Blinken, that they are working on a humanitarian plan. That plan will certainly involve Rafah in one form or another. And I would make 2 points about this. The first is that the UN is securing significant amounts of humanitarian support into El Arish, which is an airport slightly south of Rafah. That support could be deployed through Rafah, but you've got an enormous number of people now in southern Gaza, and some form of safe zone would be required to deliver that aid. You will remember that safe zones have a very checkered past, and the UN will want to ensure that any safe zone has the full cooperation and support of all parties involved. You remember what happened in Srebrenica, what happened in Rwanda about safe zones. So any negotiations which try and secure a safe zone in which these humanitarian supplies can be delivered, depends on universal support, and that's what we're working to try and secure.
But what about getting aid across the border into Gaza?
Well, that would be, this aid would come across through Rafah into southern Gaza. But in order to deliver it, you have to have agreement with all the different parties that the aid will be delivered securely and without risk to the humanitarian workers who are doing it.
How close do you think we are with that? Is the British government involved in the negotiation?
Well, the British government certainly is involved. Our Foreign Secretary was in Israel recently. The Prime Minister announced to the House of Commons yesterday that he was moving British military forces, air assets and naval forces to the eastern end of the Mediterranean to try and ensure that the conflict doesn't spread, and that we are able to interdict any arms that are coming into the area, and that we're able to watch from the sky what is happening on the ground. So Britain is playing its part in that. But also we are working very closely with the United Nations. I spoke last night to Martin Griffiths, the senior Brit at the UN, who's in charge of the humanitarian relief operations. And together with them, we will make sure that we do everything we possibly can in incredibly difficult circumstances. And of course, the Prime Minister also announced yesterday a significant uplift in the amount of taxpayers' money which we are deploying in order to support the supply of humanitarian materials, possibly into the region. £10
million or thereabouts, I believe. I know that you felt very strongly in the past about increasing the aid, that 0.7%, the foreign aid spending that we had agreed on previously, the government had agreed on previously. It was part of the manifesto, but it's still at 0.5%. Where are you on that at the moment?
Well, the budget is under much better control now. We are able, for example, to announce next year that we will be doubling the country-to-country programmes we have throughout Africa and indeed in the Middle East and elsewhere. And also we have a contingency reserve now that we're able to deploy, and it is from our humanitarian spend that the Prime Minister has announced the 10 million yesterday, and we will provide more aid into this terrible situation if it is necessary.
But as far as the Foreign Aid Fund is concerned, increasing it to 0.7%, is that something that you still feel strongly about?
Well, the government's made clear that, I certainly do, and the government's made clear that when the 2 fiscal tests that were set at the time when Parliament agreed to the reduction are satisfied, that money will increase. And it's interesting to note that the Treasury at the time of the budget in March indicated that they expected it would come back in the financial year 2027-2028.
We are expecting a ground offensive. One would assume that is not going to, in Gaza, would assume that's not going to happen until after the US president has left the area. Is there anything the UK can do to try to stop that happening?
Well, Israel has an absolute right to defend itself. We've seen the most appalling events take place, which the Prime Minister described as a pogrom. This is the worst attack on Jewish people at any time since the end of the Holocaust and the Second World War, and Israel will exercise its right to self-defence. And it's interesting to note, too, that Israel uses its army to defend its citizens. Hamas uses its citizens to defend Hamas.
You are content that the IDF, the Israeli Defence Force, will use appropriate retaliation, if that's the right word, but will go no further?
I think it's very clear from all we know about the IDF, the training they undergo, the respect for humanitarian law, the statement by the President of Israel that Israel will abide by international humanitarian law, that they are exercising the proper restraint in respect of civilians. But we should be quite clear, Israel has an absolute right to self-defence, and Britain stands foursquare behind Israel in these terrible circumstances and the appalling events which have taken place.
The Israeli ambassador in the United Kingdom sat where you were yesterday. She said that there is not a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Do you agree with her?
Well, it's clear that an enormous number of people have heeded the warnings and moved to the southern part of Gaza. That is why we are looking at ways of getting urgent humanitarian support into southern Gaza. And it's the reason why I explained what the UN and what the Americans and we are trying to do to support people who are in great danger in southern Gaza.
So just to be clear, is there a humanitarian crisis in Gaza or not, as far as the British government is concerned?
Well, there is a looming humanitarian crisis, which is why we're all so focused on trying to do everything we can to relieve it.
What's the difference between looming and it already being there, given 2,500 Palestinians or thereabouts have already died? They are lacking in water and any basic human supplies.
Well, Israel went to some lengths yesterday to make sure that the water supply was restored. And it's
restored? It had been cut off.
Yes, but that obviously helps very significantly. But it's important to note, too, that the pipes supplying the water have been dug up by Hamas and other terrorists and used as weaponry against Israel. So I think that it was the right thing to do, and Israel should be credited with having taken that humanitarian action. Palestinian
sources are telling us this morning that areas where refugees have been sent are the victims of airstrikes this morning.
Well, I think that is incredibly unlikely, and I point you to the words of the Israeli president about international humanitarian law. Airstrikes, we know, have been used in northern Gaza and have started to degrade the command structure of Hamas. That's what we read in the papers, and that is all part of Israel's absolute legitimate right to defend itself.
And as far as Hamas is concerned, I must let you go after this question. As far as Hamas is concerned, what does the British government think should happen to Hamas leaders who are presently sheltering in places like Qatar?
Well, the Hamas leaders are guilty of the most heinous crime, and the Israeli government will hunt them down and either bring them to justice or they will be killed during the course of the military action that takes place.
Whichever border they have to cross in order to achieve that?
The Israeli government has an absolute right to self-defence, and in these circumstances that clearly involves destroying the Hamas terrorists who perpetrated this terrible, terrible act.
Including going to Qatar to take them out?
Well, I can't possibly comment on anything like that. First of all, I don't know, and secondly, we would never comment on such matters. But the Israeli government has an absolute right to defend itself, and I hope that is something which all of us can agree on today in these very difficult circumstances.
OK, we are out of time, but I did just want to ask you about the Palestinian stage that was erected by the cenotaph. You're a former soldier, so I assumed that you might have a view on that at the weekend.
I think that everyone should be acting with restraint, and as the Prime Minister has made clear, we will ensure that the full force of law, in particular in respect of hate speech and so forth, takes place if the laws of the land are in any way infracted.
OK, it's good to see you, Mr Mitchell, as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.